So yes, this is my most epic project yet. Hi, I'm Dan and welcome to Therapy Woodworks, the funky little wood shop where we learn about woodwork and a lot of times have a lot of fun. Today is the culmination of a project that has taken me a whole entire year. Yep, I started this in February a year ago and here we are at the end of January and it's finally complete. Probably one of the biggest epic projects I will ever make in my entire woodworking career. This is a bar cabinet that I built. It was purpose built for this exact spot. It's an interesting piece in that it is a cabinet, but resembles a piece of furniture. So this video is going to be the summary of the build of this bar. I'm going to provide a lot more videos in the future of each section of this bar being completed. So the cabinet had to be original in concept and original in design. The design has gone through many iterations. When I was drawing it up on SketchUp, I've had to change a lot along the road. The whole unit was actually designed as components, being the center component and two end components that were actually screwed together in cabinetry style. There actually is no joinery except for the screws. This also started out in design form as a floating cabinet. Well, as the weight continued to grow and this thing got exponentially heavy, I was a little bit concerned about the heaviness of the cabinet itself. And not only that, when you put 50 pounds of go juice in these things and you extend them out, it's going to get really, really heavy on those anchors on the wall. It is a floating cabinet with some legs attached. So there were some criteria in this build. This bar had to be the centerpiece of our kitchen. It could not be the typical boring cabinetry that you typically find in a kitchen. I needed something a little more exciting. I wanted this piece to be a floating piece, so a cabinet bolted to the wall. It had to be a wet bar, hence the sink and the faucet. Some people like to have water in their scotch. The cabinet had to have easy access drawers for our alcaboos and all of the glassware that we were going to store inside it. It had to incorporate some live edge walnut. It had to incorporate some epoxy because I don't have a lot of experience with epoxy and I wanted to give it a try. Even though that I think epoxy is a bit of a fad, it had to have fancy disco mood lighting that I can control with my app in my phone. So this build was kind of unique in the fact that it was a blend of construction techniques. It has all the earmarkings of fine furniture, and that we used quality hardwood that you would find in fine furnishing. I also used a lot of the joinery techniques that you would find in fine furnishings, such as mitered corners, floating tenons, grooved through dados, and things like that. The other type of construction technique that we used is cabinetry. I used a lot of plywood and plywood strips, not that you'll actually ever see it, unless you open the drawers and take them out, but there's a lot of plywood in there that we use in cabinetry. This saves on using hardwood, which cuts the costs of the cabinet. We also use cabinet type of joinery, such as pocket holes and screws to join the different sections of each of the boxes. So I mentioned the drawer fronts. They are, as you can tell, kind of unique. And they were the first component that I actually built in the whole project. And that was because I needed to learn the techniques of forming epoxy. I needed to understand if I could actually do it or not, and whether it was viable for me to continue with the project by experimenting and making the drawer fronts. There is a video, I will leave a link for it. So the drawer fronts were constructed using live edge black walnut and a black epoxy that I used a black pearl pigment. All of the visible parts, or every part that you can see of the cabinet, are constructed of walnut. The rest of the cabinet is constructed of 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood. So on all of the visible joints of the cabinet, being the fronts and on the side, I used 45-degree angle miter joints and floating tenons. Not only does it gives it strength, but it also gives it a very visual aesthetic that is very pleasing. all of the fronts of the cabinets were chamfered, and the drawers are actually inset into the cabinet. I like that look. It's very clean and adds just a hint of interest as opposed to having straight flush cabinetry all along the front. So all of the plywood that I used at the back of the cabinet sections themselves were all pocket holed and glued together. A plenty strong enough and very acceptable technique used in cabinetry. So I needed a transition between the sections of the cabinet. You'll see kind of an interesting transition. I would have been very boring if I would have just left that a plain flat piece of walnut. So I figured, it's a bar, why can't I put a wine rack in there? So I did. The transition is merely screwed together, the same sort of technique that we use in cabinetry again. So all of the main parts of it that you see again are walnut. The shelves inside are Baltic birch, and they are recessed inside the cabinet using a through dado technique. The floating top was a whole entity on itself. It has gone through many incarnations. I had a lot of live edge walnut left over from the cabinet and the drawer front build, so I decided to put it to good use. I decided that it would embrace another fad in this build, in that I decided to use the live edge boards and create a river effect by cutting the boards down the middle, swapping side for side, and doing an epoxy inset. This also allowed me to create a lighting effect down the middle of the river, which I kind of like. These are kind of big drawers and very tall. They quite easily fit a set of wine glasses. I decided to split the drawers and actually add some inserts. These insert drawers lie within the inside of the cabinet, and they also house different types of glasses and accessories that you would expect to find in a bar. I even flocked the interior of one of the drawers because it held some of our fancy fluted wine glasses. All of these drawers use push to access sliders in them. As you'll notice, there is no handles in the front of it. My knees appreciate it because I don't bang my knees on the handles. These drawer slides are basically a push to open. The drawers themselves, you'll see that I constructed them out of maple. Now this maple was kind of special. It was maple that I absconded with from my son. No, he let me borrow it. Anyways, he had cut a tree down on Vancouver Island. Somehow along the way in some of his moves, it ended up drying in my woodshed. It's been down for 2 years, it was very dry, so I decided to use some of it. I used a technique called box joints to form the joinery, and the box joints are quite visible. Some people may not even ever notice, but I will. Because it's a floating cabinet, I wanted to add a floating top effect to it. I happen to have some walnut veneer kicking around left over from the cabinet build. The top was glued on in 3 sections, with particular attention being paid to these 2 joints here, as they are the only joints that are really visible on it. The rest of it is pretty much floating with a few screws attaching it to the cabinet. Once I had it all together, I could go about finishing. I used Osmo Pollux. The first time for me using Osmo. It's a very good product. I really like it. The ease of application, it's beautiful. I am a little concerned about the durability of it. We'll see how that goes. This being a wet bar is going to have some alcohol and some water spilt on it. Sanding the cabinet to 180 grit and applying 2 coats of the Osmo Pollux in basically a wipe on, wipe off finish. And the last piece of finishing work that I put into it was the Energizer lights. It adds some neat lighting effect to both top of the cabinet and also inside the wine holder. The last thing that I had to add to the cabinet were these little legs. I was very concerned this cabinet was getting very heavy. So I added these legs on the front. I ran out of walnut, so I used Brazilian cherry. I think it's a neat little contrast. It follows the lines of the cabinet that are already existing and already there, and it adds a little bit of safety for when people use the bar as a seat and not a drink holder. It's been done. Someone sat on it. So watch for future videos on the build of this cabinet. I have over 200 hours of footage that I have to incorporate into making separate videos for each component of the cabinet. I have to thank you all. It's been 4 years in this YouTube journey now, and 4 years since I started Therapy Woodworks. I now have 1,800 subscribers, and I thank you all very much. Every single one of you counts. The other staggering statistic that I learned today was you folks have spent 12,000 hours watching my videos. I appreciate that. That is just astounding. Again, thank you all. We'll see you on the next video. You do. Oops. Cooper says thank you too. I can afford his dog food.